So there's a lot of them, but there's probably three that come to mind that across the board happen in almost every lawyer I've met. And the first one is making assumptions that are really just very incorrect. So we assume things like what other people do is working, what
Mm,
other people do that may or may not be working will work for me. It's going to take forever. Therefore, I don't have enough time to commit to it. Those are big assumptions that are just incorrect at all levels. And then they lawyers have this bad ability to assume that if somebody needs me, they'll come to me. I don't need to make the ask. And there's a lot of mindset stuff that we could get into that relates to that, but you do need to make the ask. You actually have to ask for people's business for them to send it to you most of the time. There are the unicorns out there who will come to you, but most people you need to ask. You need to make an
right.
explicit ask. And another one is we stick to the legal stuff too much and we don't speak the language of our clients. So most clients do not care about all the legalese stuff. They expect that you're going to understand that, you're going to know it, you're going to protect them, you're going to look out for them, you're going to look out for their risks. What they need to know in their language is how will this impact them on a daily basis, right? How will it improve their daily life?
Welcome to the Free Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Gary Miles. The Free Lawyer Podcast is designed for the lawyer, entrepreneur, or professional who is in some way unfulfilled, stressed, or stuck and is looking for something better. We will discuss various blocks that limit us from achieving the personal freedom that we all desire but have not yet fully experienced. And we will give actionable steps to free yourself from them. Are you looking to achieve a new level of success? If so, this podcast is for you. Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode of The Free Lawyer. And for those of you who are listening for the first time, I'm Gary Miles, your host. I've been practicing law for 45 years. And a couple of years ago, I dedicated myself, instead of fighting with lawyers and litigation and trying to beat you, I wanted to wrap my arms around you and help you thrive and survive and be happy. So I started this podcast a couple of years ago. Mondays I have a solo episode, and today I have a guest episode. And my messages are always intended to support you, lift you, and give you helpful information. So if you're listening for the first time, welcome. I'm glad you're here. For those of you who listened before, I thank you as well. If you haven't done so already, click the follow button so you'll be able to see these when they drop on Monday and Thursday. If you like what you hear, I'd love you to leave a rating and review. It helps the podcast be heard by more folks. So I'm really grateful to have today with us Heather Moulder. Heather is simply an incredible person, a real leader in our profession. She was a former big law partner, practiced for 18 years, and then left the active practice of law to become a coach. And she hosts an amazing podcast called the Life and Law Podcast. If you haven't listened to it yet, find it and listen to it, because you'll learn so much helpful information about how to grow your practice and become a better leader. And she traded in her huge book of business to help you build your ideal law practice, but also live the life you actually want to live. And she uses a unique framework tailored to each client's strengths, values, and needs. And she supports you in building a 7-figure legal practice without having to sacrifice yourself in the process. And her clients rave about her and what she does for them. She's had some of her clients grow their business 10 times, which is hard to imagine, but that's how good Heather is. So I really look forward to hearing her insights today and urge you to connect with her. So with all that being said, Heather, welcome to the Free Lawyer.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
And I'm grateful to have you. Heather, you left a really successful and booming big law practice to become a coach for lawyers. What led you to make such a bold career pivot? And how did your own personal experiences shape that decision?
So, I am a breast cancer survivor. I was diagnosed with an aggressive breast cancer called triple negative breast cancer. A lot of people don't realize that there's all these different kinds of breast cancer. We just think of it as one. I found out at that time that there's a lot of different kinds. And I will say that the prognosis initially was not good because of the type of cancer that it was and how fast growing it was. It literally freaked my doctors out, and it was very clear it freaked them out. So
Wow.
it was, and I was young. I was
That
38 years
must have
old.
been really, really scary.
It was crazy scary. So it's not what you expect at the age of 38,
No.
right? It's not what you expect when you don't have any family history that you know of. And you've got two young kids. So at the time, my kids were 6 and 2.
Wow.
And I remember thinking there were two moments that really stuck with me post cancer, which is ultimately what led me out of the law. And the first moment was looking at my 2-year-old and thinking, is he even going to remember me? Which then led me to envisioning my funeral. I know this sounds morbid, but it's true. When you're like faced with these things, you think about these things, right?
Sure.
And I remembered back to my grandfather's funeral, who had been an amazing person in a lot of ways, been very successful, but he always measured success based on the impact he made on individual human beings. And you could tell by the people who showed up at his funeral, how many were there, what they said about him. And I thought through, well, who's going to show up to mine and what are they going to say? And I didn't really love what I came up with. I mean, yeah, I was nice and people liked me and I had a good practice and I was quote unquote successful, but I didn't feel at the time that I had made enough of an impact based on the standard that my grandfather had set. So that was kind of like the seed that planted. I did not know at the time it would lead me out of the practice,
Just want
but
to interrupt to
ultimately,
say what a
uh-huh.
great role model your
Oh,
grandfather was
he
for
was.
how to live life, not just to make money and be successful in a career, but really to touch and support people. My daughter's father-in-law was the same way. And at his funeral, everybody said Larry was the kind of guy that always made you feel special and you always
Mm.
felt better after you spoke to him. And that sounds like your grandfather.
Yes, he was a huge influence it to me and on my life. And so when I came back into the law, so I took almost a year off during the cancer battle because it really was pretty intense. The treatment I had to go through, the surgeries I needed, all of that. I came back thinking, okay, I'm back. I'm going to go do the thing I've always done. But there was something in the back of my mind kind of there, right? That was like, but you haven't, what else can you do? How else can you impact people? And I just remember about a year and a half, 2 years later, it took a while. So this is one of those things that I've learned that you probably have learned through life because you've had a great, a, a lot of experiences of your own and learned a lot, and you have a wonderful story. Oftentimes, there are pivotal moments in our lives that really do make an impact, but it takes a while for them to fully come to fruition. I've learned,
Yes.
and we're
Yes,
impatient,
we
we
are.
humans, and I had this in the back of my mind. I wasn't feeling like things were quite right for a long time, but I didn't really know what to do with it. And I think I needed to sit with it for a while. But it was somewhere between 18 months and 2 years later. I just remember sitting at my kitchen, doing the dishes, and I had this like almost out of body experience where I felt like I was watching myself from above. And I'm looking at this person going, well, she looks like me, she talks like me, but she doesn't feel like me anymore. What's going on here? So that was when I made the decision that I needed to figure something out. And I didn't know what that something was, but ultimately it led me into a lot of self-awareness work, a lot of mindset work, and then a lot of personal development work that led me to leave the law.
Mhm.
Because what I learned was that my values, and you mentioned values earlier, I'm very values based. One of my main values has always been service. Pretty sure I got it from my grandfather, Charlie.
Yes.
That value changed for me through that experience. Instead of wanting to just serve my clients to the best of their ability, serve my family to the best of my ability, which was still there, I realized I wanted to make a more individual impact on the lives of individuals because I
Mhm.
felt like I could help people based on my past and my struggles and what I learned live more fulfilling lives and achieve the quote unquote success that they wanted, but in a way where they actually enjoyed themselves. Um, and that eventually led me to leave my practice, start my coaching business, and it led me into lawyer coaching because we all know a lot of lawyers out there are successful on paper, but not terribly happy. And
Not
that's a
terribly
shame.
happy, and sometimes the more successful, the less happy they are, actually.
Yes.
It's very surprising. I think that's a beautiful story. In your practice, you obviously were very, very successful. Your clients were very pleased with your service, but the service was a little more remote or not really connected to who you are and who you wanted to be. It didn't
Right.
change the lives of your clients, the success you had in their world. It was probably more business oriented, but now you
Yes.
realize how you can touch and support someone and change that person's life. And when you change that person's life, you're changing the life of their spouse and their kids and their siblings and their parents.
Yes.
You know, I
Because there's
think
a ripple effect.
I've shared with you before, and I've shared those podcasts. I'm sober in recovery, and I work with a lot of men in recovery. And when I can help one of them see how to live life differently, and I see how many lives are affected by that person changing their life. And the same is true with what you do when you help your clients to be not only more successful, but happier and more fulfilled. The freedom you bring to them and to their family is very, very powerful.
Hmm. Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about what you do and how you help lawyers. I know one of the main areas you help lawyers is with business development. What are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen lawyers who start with you have made in business development? And how can they correct some of those mistakes?
So I see, like, there's a lot of them, but there's probably three that come to mind that across the board happen in almost every lawyer I've met. And the first one is making assumptions that are really just very incorrect. So we assume things like what other people do is working, what
Hmm.
other people do that may or may not be working will work for me. It's going to take forever. Therefore, I don't have enough time to commit to it. Those are big assumptions that are just incorrect at all levels. And then they lawyers have this bad ability to assume that if somebody needs me, they'll come to me. I don't need to make the ask. And there's a lot of mindset stuff that we could get into that relates to that, but you do need to make the ask. You actually have to ask for people's business for them to send it to you most of the time. There are the unicorns out there who will come to you, but most people you need to ask. You need to make an
Right.
explicit ask. And another one is we stick to the legal stuff too much and we don't speak the language of our clients. So most clients do not care about all the legalese stuff. They expect that you're going to understand that, you're going to know it, you're going to protect them, you're going to look out for them, you're going to look out for their risks. What they need to know in their language is how will this impact them on a daily basis, right? How will it improve their daily life? And lawyers are terrible about doing that. We don't connect the dots very well.
Seems like sometimes too often we talk about who we are, what our background is, what our experience is, and not how can I solve that problem you have? How can I make your
Yes.
business better? How can I answer that concern you have and give you a solution that will work for you?
Yes, so it's a shift, a mindset shift around instead of needing to prove myself, you don't actually have to talk about yourself at all or very little. It's shifting it from you focused to them focused. How can I serve them? So one of the things I like to teach my clients is pretend you are talking to somebody you already represent. Pretend they're already your client. In any marketing that you do, whenever you're networking with somebody new, whatever it is, right? Because then you get to shift into how you're already relating to clients, which works with your clients. That's how you want to show up in your business development. And it takes away some of that mindset stuff that gets in a lot of people's way, which is, "Ugh, I'm a lawyer. I shouldn't have to sell or market. I don't know how to sell or market. It feels pushy and sleazy and whatever to sell." We think of the used car salesman, right?
Right.
No, it doesn't if you're coming at it from a service-based perspective where you're just there to help, you're there to solve problems, and when it comes to making the ask, you ask in a very natural, organic way because it comes up in a very natural, organic way when you're in that place. So it's a shift that needs to be made.
What are, you mentioned mindset a couple of times
Mhm.
with the clients you start to work with, or even lawyers you don't work with who you know, what are some of the mindset struggles they face when it comes to business development?
I think we lawyers care a lot about what others think of us. Yeah, I hear this a lot. My reputation is everything. And they're thinking about their reputation in the, with the general population. They're thinking about their reputation with their clients. They're thinking about their reputation within their firms. I mean, it's all encompassing. And what that often translates into is, well, then I'm afraid to say much because what if I say something that's wrong? Or what if I say something that somebody else doesn't agree with? And we get into it. It's interesting to me that we take that mindset in our business development, but we don't when we're arguing on behalf of our clients.
Mhm.
So the trick is to start combining those two things. And that's what this service-based shift kind of helps with. Because you get out of, oh, what if I say something wrong? Or what if somebody disagrees with me? Okay, well, if I'm there to serve and they're like my client already, I can take on the same aspect I do for my clients and just really be there to solve a problem and serve. And that means if I do discover that something was misstated or I didn't think of something, I mean, I can step back like I would in my regular practice, go, oh, that's interesting. Let me incorporate that and let's talk about it. It's a very different way of looking at it.
I love the thought of looking at the prospective client as if it's someone you already represent, because with people we represent, we don't have to sell ourselves to them. We don't have to tell them how good we are, what our background is, what
Right.
our experience is, but we're there to help them solve problems. What's going on now? What do you need today? How can I help you? How can I serve you? And
Yes.
and the same is true with the prospective client. Instead of us talking about ourselves, let the prospective client talk about what's going on with them, what's going on with their business, what their needs are. And then we find out what their needs are. Maybe we are the person to be of service to them, but maybe not. Maybe we refer them to another lawyer or another department in our firm, but we can look at ourselves as problem solvers and how we can be of service to that prospective client.
Yeah, and you get at something really important there. So when you make this shift, it's you're much less likely to go into a networking event, a marketing activity, talking with a prospect with this need based, I have to convince them. I need to get the client, right? Which is very needy. It comes across as needy. It's when you get into that pushy, sleazy, salesy mode without even
Yes.
realizing it or wanting to. And that's not what you're there for. If you're just there to serve them, you're more likely to ask good and better questions. You're more likely to dig in and figure out, how can I help them? Can I help them? If I can't, who can I refer them to? Which, by the way, will earn you way more points than trying to prove yourself, that you're the one. So it also involves a mental shift around, you don't need everybody out there. Everybody doesn't need to be your client. Not everybody's meant to be your client. You're not to be meant to be everybody else's lawyer. You're meant for the people who are good fits for you. And you're there to interview them as much as they are to interview you for that fit, right? So if when you go into it that way, it's a very different conversation. It's a very different mindset, and it's a very different way of showing up. And it feels better, frankly, because you're more you. You're showing up in a way that you show up with your clients on a day-to-day basis instead of trying to market and trying to sell.
Do some lawyers have a fear of being seen as self-promoting and
Yeah.
that holds them back?
Oh,
And
yeah.
how do you help them to handle that? Tell me about what that looks like.
So mostly that comes up when I find that coming up, and I find this very interesting. A lot of lawyers are willing to write an article. They're willing to go give a speech at a conference. But when it comes to getting on LinkedIn or some other social media, that's when this comes up the most.
Hmm.
And I think that we need to see that that's not any different than writing the article or making the speech. You're there to showcase, here's what I do, here's how I help people. If you're the right fit, that here's what you need to know. And you're also there to give valuable information. So I think a lot of people in those instances are going about it the wrong way. They're thinking they have to sell, thinking they have to prove, thinking they have to like showcase their long resume. Instead, they need to just show up and say, okay, here's a problem I see all the time. Here's how to fix it. Or here are the questions you need to ask. You're going at it a little bit different. Again, very service based. And what I would say is the biggest help I've found for myself, because I went through this as well when I first started this business, because back when I was practicing, LinkedIn wasn't that big of a thing. And marketing was done a little bit differently. Things have started to change, right? More and more lawyers are getting onto LinkedIn and doing other social media strategies. Um, I had to start doing that and thinking, okay, how do I show up? Well, envision one specific client and just talk to them. That's probably the easiest way. And if it's a networking event, you're just see it as I'm just here to find out what I can. Like you're on a fact-finding mission. You're just trying to figure out who they are, what are their needs, so that if I can serve them, great. If I can send them somewhere else, great. It's not about selling at the end of the day. It's about being there for them, meeting. We like to say in coaching world, you probably know this, meet them where they are.
Right.
Meet them where they are and just talk like two human beings. And the same goes on social media. Think of that one person and talk to them.
One thing I know you mentioned and things you post and write is the power of storytelling. How
Mm.
can a lawyer use stories, their own or their clients, to help grow their business?
So, storytelling is really powerful psychologically to make a real connection with people who are more likely to find a connection with you. I have found it is the best way to either attract or repel people. And again, you don't want to represent everybody. You don't need to represent everybody. So, storytelling helps to showcase your values. It showcases your strengths, how you utilize your skills and your strengths on behalf of your client. It showcases your approach, right? Because we all have a different way of thinking and approaching things. It showcases all of that if you actually storytell. And so there's two kind of levels of short storytelling. There's the what one of my clients likes to say, the capital S story, which is really your personal why you do what you do, and or if you have a law firm, the law firm's why you do what you do. And that encompasses the stories of all the people that make up that firm, right? And that's really great because it provides a connection, it showcases your values, and it helps to repel people who might not be great fit clients from a values perspective. And it attracts people who would be. And then there's the individual, like client related stories where you actually share, here's a common problem, here's how we fixed it, here's the approach we took. And I find that a lot of lawyers are scared to death to share that because they're like, oh, but I could be sharing confidential information, or I could be, my clients would get upset if they knew I was talking about them. But there's a way to do it without divulging confidential information or even showcasing who the client is. So it's incredibly beneficial for making that connection and showcasing what you really do and kind of showing how you show up in a day-to-day basis for your clients.
One of the things you mentioned, one of the fears lawyers have is it'll take so much time. I'm so busy. I got so many hours I have to bill. How can I find the time to grow my business? How do you help them add that to their already busy plate and still enjoy life and grow their business at the same time?
So this is where letting go of what everybody else does comes into play because we often assume I have to write, I have to speak, I have to get on LinkedIn, I have to do all these things that I'm seeing everybody else doing. No. What I do with my clients is we do this big brain dump of all the things you could do, all the things you're good at. And then we get together and we figure out, okay, what makes actual sense for you, given not just your strengths and skills, but given your current circumstances, given your stage in life. So a lot of times, lawyers are good writers and they can speak. Well, but they don't need to do both necessarily, right? So what I like to do is they start with one thing, get good at that one thing, get consistent at that one thing, and you can build on that if you want. But oftentimes you don't have to when it comes to marketing. So maybe you like to write, but you don't have time for writing long articles. So write on LinkedIn, short posts just once a week. It doesn't take that much time. Helps to establish your brand, helps to showcase what you do, how you do it, who you do it for. You can showcase your stories. Or maybe you don't love writing or you just don't, you don't have an inclination towards that. Speak. Speaking can be incredibly effective. And speaking can be done in a lot of different ways. I think a lot of lawyers think, oh, I have to go speak at these big conferences. Not necessarily. You can speak on panels, which is really easy to prepare for because it's not just you, it's a panel where you're just sharing your knowledge. And that's where a lot of my clients will start. You can speak locally at local, industry associations, professional associations. It all depends on the kind of practice you have and your clients. And if you target the right places, you don't have to even do it that often. You just speak a couple times a year and you network incredibly well afterwards, and that can lead to real business.
So what you're saying is instead of doing the whole menu of possible activities, we figure out what is your client like best? What is he or she best at? And we're laser focused on picking the right approach, the right strategy for that particular client.
Well, it's based on where is your client, but also what's your skill set? What's your strength? Strength meaning what are you really good at that people go to you for if it's even above and beyond skills? So, for example, I don't know if you know the Clifton Strengths Finder used to be known as. If anybody wants to figure out what their strengths are and you're not real clear, that's a great way to go do it. I think it's like $50 or something to go do. It's really pretty cheap for the information it gives you. But I had a client who was known, and I can't remember what the Clifton Strengths name for this, but she's an incredible collaborator. And she understands intuitively, she reads people really well, and she puts great teams together. So over the course of her career, she went into a practice that was more complex litigation oriented, where she was more the manager. And she showcases that in the marketing that she does, because that's what she brings to the table. So you understand your strengths and you understand how to utilize them in whatever you're doing. But then you also have to understand your needs, right? So your needs change based on your circumstances and stage of life. So somebody, with young kids at home who wants to be home more may not want to speak if it involves traveling more.
Right.
Maybe you choose to speak locally only, or maybe you just choose to start on LinkedIn and write once or twice a week because that works within your schedule. So that's the other thing is you're probably going to find you have a lot of things you could do that you would enjoy. Hone in on the one thing that makes sense for you now, and it will change over time.
One of the things I know is important to both you and me individually, but also with our clients is values. What are my values and how can I live my life consistently with them? And one of the things I've seen with lawyers is they often take a job without thinking what kind of job they really want. They
Yeah.
take the one with the biggest name, the most prestige, the most money, because that's the one they're supposed to take, and they realize maybe that's not what their values are being in that firm. How do you help to assess your clients' values and use that assessment to help them build their practice?
So I like to say values are what help determine the who and the what, right? So when you understand your values, and I have an assessment that my clients will go through to figure out what specifically are their values. They usually have an intuitive sense, but most people haven't put words to them and haven't defined them. So we start there. Then we figure out what are the gaps and how to fill those gaps, right? And the gap is where am I now versus where would I be if my value were fully aligned? And sometimes that can lead to some pretty big changes because sometimes, I like a lot of people say law firms can be very toxic, and some really can. But most I don't think are in and of themselves, but they are toxic to individuals who aren't a good values fit. So when you understand your values, you can figure out, well, what are the actual values of this firm? What's the culture of this firm? And are they in alignment with my values?
Right.
So that's the who, the where you practice, who you practice with, who you hire for your team members, who you choose to take on as a client. Too many lawyers take on just anybody. If they're not a values fit, they're not your best fit, and they're going to be the high maintenance, difficult clients that when you hear or see that phone ring and you see that, oh, that's that number, you're going to be like, oh, I don't want to answer the phone. That means that client is not a values fit,
Right.
right? And it also helps determine what industry are you in? What's your niche? What are you actually doing in your day to day? Because we have a lot of choices as lawyers.
We do.
Use something that fits you.
We do.
Yeah.
I know you've had clients who've grown their business by 10 times.
Mhm.
And yet lawyers often face burnout. How can someone put the energy and time into growing their business and to build their business to such a level and not be so overwhelmed and burned out?
Well, I think we focus too much on time, and it takes care of itself if you actually look at it very differently, which is, to me, feeling balanced is more about how you feel. Like, do you feel like good in your own skin? Are you making decisions that align with your actual values? Are you working with people you enjoy working with that make you feel energized as opposed to resentful or
Right,
bitter or
right.
that, oh, they're calling, right? So it starts there. And then are you content with the decisions you're making? So that's where the balancing act comes into play. How are you making your decisions? Sometimes it means saying no to work because you've been working more lately and you need to be home more. Sometimes it means taking on something that doesn't come up very often, but then setting very clear boundaries around that. So, for example, I was a corporate finance lawyer back when I practiced, and dip facilities. Do you know what a dip facility is? Debtor in possession facilities. Basically, they're in bankruptcy. They're crazy, and it means a ridiculous amount of time. But they're usually somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks. It's a pretty short period of time. And a client came in and said, "We have this facility. We want you to do it." And I was like, "Okay, I can because it'll be interesting. It'll be challenging. It's good for me. It's good for my practice. I don't get this opportunity, but I need to set boundaries around it." And so I was very clear at setting my standards up front. Didn't work past 4 on Fridays, had mornings on Saturdays and Sundays with my kids, even though I would work on Saturdays and Sundays. The other days were all over the place. And I talked to my husband and we talked it through, and there was a time limit on it. And then after that was done, I also set a standard of I won't take more than. I will turn work down. I won't get too busy for a month or two because I will need that time to recoup. So I think a lot of it has to do with intentionality and being a little more intentional about your day to day and what you take and why.
I agree. I think sometimes we look at time as being something we don't have or we lack, instead of looking at something we own and it's a gift that we can purposely use it any way we want to use it. And
Yes.
and you purposely used your later Friday afternoons, your Saturday mornings, your Sunday mornings to be with your family. That was your choice. That was your choice of how you wanted to use your time. And I think when we empower ourselves to kind of purposely choose how we want to use the hours in the day we have, and it may mean turning down some business, it may be referring some business out, it may be delegating to a team member or saying to our firm, we need to hire another associate because I have too much work to do. But purposely choosing how to use our time can be very freeing, even though it's a little scary because it's hard to say no. It's hard to say I can't work Saturday and Sunday morning, but
And
it's
that's,
important.
yeah. And I think that's where, and you know this because I know you live your life this way, that's where values come in. This is why being really attuned to your values is so important because it helps give you permission for saying no when you know you want and need to say no for yourself, for your family, for your health, for whatever. It helps to create those boundaries that you need. Most lawyers have real trouble with boundaries.
And
Give yourself permission.
the other thing I've seen some lawyers struggle with is even if they set that boundary, I'll use you as an example. Saturday and Sunday mornings are with my kids, and your son plays baseball, say his baseball game, whatever. But when you're at the game, not you, but someone could be at that child's game and they're thinking about work. They
Yep.
blocked out the time, but they aren't present in the moment.
Yeah.
And when our minds always, we've talked before about how life goes fast and getting older is a good thing. But part of the joy of getting older is being focused in the moment and enjoying the experience.
Mm.
Many of us let our minds be elsewhere. When it is our time with our family, they're still thinking about work. And what do I have to do on Monday? When they're home on a Sunday morning with their family, they're not doing anything then except being with their family, but they're thinking about Monday. And I think that way robs them of the joy of their balanced life.
And you said something really important there. They're letting themselves do that. I think too many lawyers don't see that as a choice when it is. And what I would say to anybody in the middle of that is it can be really hard to figure out how to like choose differently. Get help. There's plenty of people out there who can help with that. And there are tools that you can utilize. But really, the first step is accepting that it is a choice.
Well, I think that's one thing that you and I as coaches do for our clients is we help them
Yes.
realize those mental habits that they may be going through that we can, hey, see what you're doing there? Now let's try to do something different and help them get to a better place.
Yeah.
Let's shift the topic a little bit and talk about leadership.
Mhm.
So many of us go to law school, we compete with others in our class, we form some nice relationships, we come into law and we were for the first time learning how to be a lawyer. But then all of a sudden we have a team that works with us. We may have an associate, a paralegal, and a legal assistant. And and no one's taught us how to be a leader. And my thought is sometimes what makes us very good, I was a litigator, makes us very good litigators, sometimes makes us very bad leaders. Some of those
Right.
traits of arrogance and bullheadedness and forcefulness doesn't necessarily make us a good leader. Talk to me about how you help your clients to be better leaders, because all of them are progressing in their careers and they're learning they need to be leaders.
So, in my experience, we lawyers are really bad leaders, primarily because we try to control everything that is uncontrollable. And we don't focus on the one thing that actually we have control over, which is us. So, we could try to control other people's behaviors, their reactions, what they think, what they do, the outcome of a case or deal. You don't actually have control, full control. All you have is control over your input. So, we're overly focused on output and we're not focused enough on input. And I think shifting that perspective into input is huge because then that opens up a whole gamut of the areas that we need to work on to become good leaders, managers. And frankly, this is also a really big piece of happiness, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, just to
And
interrupt you a second. The concept you're talking about is what I call acceptance. And I think it's one
yes,
of the single most important tools to live a happy life, because so often I focus on the things that annoy me and the things I
mhm.
can't change. The partner who's I love my firm, but that one partner's such a pain and he says all these things that push my buttons, or the client who's so demanding, or the lawyer on the other side of the case. And you talked about not being so outcome oriented. I think that's so important too. I did trial work. And in the beginning of my career, I was so hyper focused on what does it mean if I win? Or more likely, what will it mean when I lose? And I
Mm.
realized I love being a trial lawyer. I love preparing my examinations, my openings. Just get into work and do it and do my best effort. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me. I have a client who used to say all the time, everything is so chaotic. I just can't believe, because she's got her own firm, she's building it, she's got young kids, and chaotic to her was bad. And I'm like, well, what if you just accepted that it's gonna be chaotic? And what if it could be fun? Like, you have a choice here, right? And so I think it's hard to move into that mindset of choice without the acceptance. You've got to accept this is what it is. How do I learn to live within it? As opposed to always pushing, 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 pushing against it.
Resistance just creates stress. When we resist
Correct.
those things we can't control, we just create our own stress.
Yes. Yes. And I think when we get into that place where we finally open up to all of that, that's when it gets easier to then start working on the skill side development. And we have probably all heard, I'm sure you've talked about EQ, emotional intelligence. It's necessary. I mean, some people say it's soft skills. I don't really love that because it makes it sound like it's not as important somehow, right? But it's EQ is really about, first and foremost, it starts from within. I find a lot of lawyers like to start with the other, right? Right. The how do I manage down? How do I communicate? No, 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 no. It starts from within, which is why the acceptance piece is so important, because you have to become very self-aware and you have to become very self-responsible. Good leaders are some of the most self-responsible people you will find out there, which means they're very self-aware of their own weaknesses, of their habits, of what tends to trip them up, and they plan around it appropriately and get help for it and delegate a lot more too for that reason. Nobody's going to respect you or listen to what you have to say if you can't first take care of you. So it all starts there.
So I'm very familiar with and understand the concept of emotional intelligence very well, but some of our listeners may not. So when you use that term and you're talking about helping one of your clients become a better leader,
Mhm.
what does that shift or transition in their mindset look like?
So it starts with the acceptance piece. And then this openness to, well, I actually have a choice. And I can start not just becoming more self aware, but actually change my own habits and behavior of thinking. And then that will impact others. And once you get into that realm, the next step is to start being open to understanding others more. When you can understand yourself better, those same tools can help you understand others better, which then helps you to be more empathetic, which is absolutely a big requirement of good leadership, right?
Yes, it is.
And that gives you the kind of internal motivation and drive to be a little more open, to be a little more like respectful, even if you don't agree with what the other person is saying or doing or how they're going about something. And it allows you to help them better because you're looking at it not from a very judgment based, why are they doing this? What is going on? This keeps happening. Instead, it's a whoa, let's get curious. Let's dig in. Let's figure out how we can help one another. Let me see if I can understand what's going on here more. That's really necessary for good leadership.
And one of the things that you're speaking to without using the word is listening.
Mm.
Too many lawyers are great speakers, and we like telling other people how to do things better or solve their problems. We're trained to solve problems, but we have to begin with listening. And I've seen so many lawyers in the practice, so many lawyers on the other side of the case don't listen. They don't want to
Mhm.
listen to what the other lawyer's saying. They don't want to listen to what the mediator's saying. They don't want to take the hits from the judge. They're just too busy in their own mind with what they want to push or present. How does becoming a better listener connect with becoming a better leader?
So I think a lot of this has to do with letting go of always needing to be right and understanding that your way isn't the only way. And if are open to that, you can then step back and get more curious about others and start listening more. And what's interesting when you start truly listening to people is you realize how much you miss out on. Because when we're talking to somebody, and this is the usual manner, and this is not just lawyers, although I think lawyers are worse at it than many others, but people in general, you have a conversation, somebody's saying something, you're trying to listen to them, and they say something that reminds you of something or that triggers something that you want to say. So, what your brain naturally wants to do is start focusing on, oh, this is what I want to say. Well, you're totally not listening anymore. You're not catching so much. When you get to the point where you understand you don't want to do that and you see that happening and you step back, nope, keep listening, you find out you hear so much more nuance. You start understanding motivations better. That's one of the biggest things that you gain from listening is we often go in we assume, again, assuming bad, right? We assume people's intentions, we assume the why, and we're often wrong. And this way, you actually get to step back and you start to see and understand more of what's really going on, why they're behaving or doing something in a particular way, which then allows you to help them much better. And so, not only does it help you, but it helps them because then you can meet them where they are and they can actually improve performance.
Wow, that's really true. That's really true. You know, you help so many lawyers be more successful, grow their practice. What do you think the key is for them to have so many good things going on, but still maintain that balanced life without getting burned out, with still enjoying what they do, even though they built so much?
I think no matter what stage in your career you are at, you need a support system and you need to utilize that support system. One of the things I see in lawyers a lot, and this happens top to bottom, but it's even worse the more successful you get, is we tend to then get more and more isolated into our little like group of people that we manage, that we oversee. And then we lose sight of talking to others. We stop talking to peers, or we never we did, or we don't have as many mentors. And that is really key because you need people you can go to that you trust, where you can share your struggles, where you can share what you're thinking about, what you fear, what you worry about. When you don't do that, it sets off the brain's mechanism to just like repeat, 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 convince you you're the only one, convince you you don't know what you're talking about, which then makes you more afraid to share. And that's a really bad place to be because you get stuck in your brain. That's when we get paralyzed. And by talking to other people, you're going to see that they have the same struggles, they have the same issues, and they're going to be able to like help, which first off increases your confidence immediately, makes you feel like you're not alone and the only one. You're not an idiot. But then you're able to brainstorm better. Two and three and other people there for you, they create better solutions. They're going to see things you don't. They're going to have different strengths and viewpoints. And so I see that being a big problem with a lot of lawyers is we don't talk enough about our struggles with one another, especially as we're building our practices and moving up. We feel like, oh, I've got this under hand. And the next thing we know, we feel stuck.
Mhm. For the lawyer who's listening to us today, who feels like he's working so darn hard, trying to build his practice, but he's just overwhelmed, frustrated, on the edge of burnout. Um, Other than calling you or calling me, what would be the first thing that lawyer should do?
Reach out to somebody and talk to them. It is amazing how quickly that can solve problems, and they can help give you resources, advice. Reach out to somebody you trust. Reach out. I would say reach out to more than one person. And they don't always have to be lawyers. That's the other thing. Sometimes you can get some really valuable information and help from somebody who isn't a lawyer, because we lawyers get real stuck in the this is how it is, this is the path, this is the way. And somebody else is going to go, why? Wait, isn't that easier? Why can't you this? They're going to question you a little bit more, and they're going to force you to sit back and go, oh, you know what? Why did I do it that way? Why do I have to be this way? So I think it's really valuable to just talk to people.
I think that's great advice. I think one of the biggest challenges to being a lawyer is the solitude. We
Yes.
feel like we're stuck. We have no one to talk to. The lawyer next door, he seems so happy and so much more successful. And the lawyer on the other side, she's doing great and she's always smiling. And I feel overwhelmed. And I don't know I can't go to the boss here. I don't want to be judged, and I don't want to share with my spouse and concern him or her. And so we keep it inside and festers and gets worse. So talking to someone is such great advice. Wow, Heather, I want to thank you for everything you shared today. For those who are listening to you and would like to connect with you and see how you can help and serve them and make their practices better, how can they best get in touch with you?
So, a couple of places. I have the podcast, which can be found at lifeandlawpodcast.com. My coaching website is coursecorrectioncoaching.com. And then I'm also on LinkedIn, Heather Moulder, and it's Moulder.
For those of you who have not listened to Life and Law podcast, I urge you to. I don't miss an episode. It's really fantastic. And Heather is a true leader with the heart of a servant. And what I was touched by was how she had such a great practice, but realized she found greater fulfillment in helping you to be more successful. And trust me, that's the kind of person you want to work with, and you deserve the kind of coaching, leadership support she can give you. So check Heather out. She's simply amazing. Heather, thank you for being here today and sharing all your wisdom with our audience.
Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
Great. And thank you all for listening. We appreciate each and every one of you. And as always, please be well, be safe, and be free. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Free Lawyer Podcast. Wherever you are listening, if you enjoyed what I shared, please leave me a rating and review. I would appreciate hearing more about what you like best and what topics you might like me to cover in future episodes. If you are interested in experiencing a more fulfilling and a more successful life, please contact me at www.garymiles.net, where you can schedule a free discovery call with me so I can learn more about you, your challenges, and your dreams. I appreciate each and every one of you, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks to all of you for your support.